The City of London has stood at the heart of Britain's economic and commercial power for centuries. Even today, some of the largest and wealthiest companies in the world base their headquarters in the nation's capital. But none of these modern giants can compare to what was once the most powerful multinational corporation in history. More than 400 years ago, a company was founded that would go on to reshape the world: the East India Company. From its headquarters on Leadenhall Street, it began as a modest trading venture, sending ships on long and uncertain voyages to India. Yet over time, it transformed into something far greater and far more dangerous. This was no ordinary business. At its peak, the East India Company would evolve into the de facto ruler of the Indian subcontinent, wielding power that rivaled and often surpassed that of entire nations. It commanded vast private armies, defeated long-established Indian dynasties, and seized control of immense territories. Its influence was built on domination of the world's most valuable trade routes that generated unimaginable wealth for its shareholders, while tightening its grip on millions of people. But how did a private corporation rise to control one of the richest and most populous regions on Earth? How did a trading company become an empire? This is the story of the East India Company. Its origins trace back to the dawn of the 17th century. Although it wasn't the first company of its kind, the East India Company emerged during a time of fierce global ambition. By the late 16th century, only Spain and Portugal had successfully carved out vast overseas empires, stretching across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Their dominance brought immense wealth, and the rest of Europe was watching closely. Soon, other rising powers, England, France, and the Dutch Republic, became determined to claim their share of the world. But there was a problem. These long-distance expeditions were incredibly expensive and dangerously uncertain. Ships could be lost at sea, crews could vanish, entire missions could fail without a trace. For most governments, the risk was simply too great. So instead of funding these ventures themselves, they turned to a new solution. In cities like London and Amsterdam, merchants and politicians began creating something entirely new: organizations that would later be known as joint stock companies. These were the world's first modern corporations. For the first time, ordinary investors could pool their money together to fund overseas expeditions. In return, they would receive a share of the profits if the mission succeeded. It was a system that spread both risk and reward, and it changed everything. The very first of these ventures was established in 1555, the Muscovy Company. Through it, English merchants launched trade missions deep into the lands of Russia, reaching the city of Moscow and opening new commercial routes to the east. It was a modest beginning, but it marked the start of a new era, one where private enterprise, not just kings and empires, would drive global exploration, trade, and eventually conquest. Despite their early successes, London's merchants understood one thing clearly: the true wealth of global trade lay far beyond Europe, in the distant markets of the East. India, China, and the East Indies were lands of immense riches. From there came goods that Europe craved: pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, tea, silk. Luxuries so valuable they could sell for more than their weight in gold. The prize was clear. And in the year 1600, a group of ambitious London merchants made their move. They petitioned Queen Elizabeth I for royal approval to establish a new trading enterprise, one that would challenge the dominance of Iberian powers in the East. The Crown agreed. That same year, a royal charter was granted to a newly formed organization with a long and formal name: the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. The East India Company had been born. Led by a governor and a board of 24 directors, the company wasted no time. A small fleet of ships was dispatched toward the East Indies, carrying with it the hopes of profit and the seeds of empire. But success did not come easily. In its early years, the company faced fierce resistance. The Dutch East India Company and the Portuguese Crown were already deeply entrenched in the region, controlling key ports and trade routes across modern-day Malaysia and Indonesia. The English were late to the game, and it showed. Yet slowly, persistence began to pay off. By the 1610s, the company had secured trading rights from local rulers along the coasts of India. These agreements allowed English merchants to establish a presence in key ports, small footholds that would soon grow into something far larger. Then, in 1639, a decisive step was taken. The company acquired a stretch of land on India's southeastern coast. There, they founded the colony of Madras, marking their first major territorial base on the subcontinent. It was a turning point, and it would not be the last. In 1661, through a diplomatic alliance between England and Portugal, the island of Bombay was handed over to the English crown. Before long, the East India Company established itself there as well. By the late 17th century, the company had secured a chain of coastal settlements, strategic outposts that would serve as the foundation for future expansion deep into the Indian interior. But the company's ambitions did not stop at Asia. While it played only a limited role in the Americas, where other English companies held royal monopolies, it became involved in another, far darker enterprise: the slave trade. Soon after establishing its presence in India, the company began sourcing enslaved people from regions of East Africa, including Mozambique and Madagascar. This allowed it to avoid direct conflict with the Royal African Company, which dominated the slave trade along Africa's western coast. Yet, unlike its rivals, the East India Company was building something different: a vast, interconnected network of trade, power, and control. And this network was only just beginning to expand. Unlike other European powers, the East India Company did not focus on transporting vast numbers of enslaved people across the Atlantic. Instead, it turned east. Enslaved men and women were taken across the Indian Ocean to India and the East Indies, where many were forced to work in the company's factories and workshops in cities like Madras and Bombay. There, cheap labor fueled production, and profits flowed back to shareholders in London. Throughout the rest of the 17th century, the East India Company expanded, but only gradually. For the most part, it remained overshadowed by its far more powerful rival, the Dutch East India Company. Competition between the two was relentless. Trade routes, ports, influence, each became a battleground. And eventually, this rivalry spilled beyond commerce and into open war. In the latter half of the 1600s, England and the Dutch Republic clashed in a series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars, global struggles driven as much by trade as by national pride. For a time, the English lagged behind. But the next century would change everything. Because in the 1700s, the East India Company began to transform from a trading enterprise into a military power. And at the center of this transformation stood one man, Robert Clive. Joining the company at just 20 years old, Clive rose rapidly through its ranks during the late 1740s. By the early 1750s, he had become one of its most important officers in India. By then, the company was no longer just a commercial organization. It had built its own private army, thousands of British and Irish soldiers, supported by locally recruited forces and alliances with smaller Indian states. It was a force capable not just of defending trade, but of waging war. Clive understood this better than anyone, and in 1757 he made his move. Targeting the wealthy and strategically vital region of Bengal, Clive led a bold campaign against its ruler, the Nawab. What followed would become one of the most decisive moments in the company's history: the Battle of Plassey. There, a relatively small British-led force prepared to face an army many times its size. Armed with modern artillery and disciplined rifle fire, Clive's force faced an army that vastly outnumbered them, tens of thousands strong. And yet, against all odds, they won. The Battle of Plassey ended in a decisive victory, and with it, everything changed. In the years that followed, Robert Clive and the East India Company secured control over Bengal, one of the richest regions in India. This was no longer just trade. This was rule. For the first time, the company expanded beyond scattered ports and coastal factories, transforming into a territorial power, governing land, collecting revenue, and commanding populations. It was the beginning of an empire built not by a nation, but by a corporation. And it would not stop there. In the decades that followed, Clive and other company officers pushed deeper into the Indian subcontinent. Their expansion often came at the expense of smaller local rulers, princes and nawabs whose territories were gradually absorbed. But greater challenges lay ahead. To the west stood three powerful forces: the Mughal Empire, still dominant across much of northern India and present-day Pakistan; the Maratha Confederacy, which controlled vast regions of central India; and the Sultanate of Mysore, the strongest power in the south. At the same time, another European rival entered the struggle: France. From fortified ports like Pondicherry, French forces sought to expand their own influence in India, turning the subcontinent into a battleground not just for local powers, but for global empires. Then came a turning point. In 1756, the 7 Years' War erupted, a global conflict between Britain and France. Its impact was felt across continents, including India. For the East India Company, it was an opportunity, and they took it. Under leaders like Clive, British forces successfully pushed back the French, securing dominance in key regions and weakening their greatest European rival. But victory did not bring peace. Instead, it marked the beginning of decades of near-constant warfare. For almost half a century, the East India Company fought relentlessly against India's remaining powers. Campaign after campaign, battle after battle, the subcontinent became a theater of continuous conflict. The wars against Mysore alone would rage across 4 separate conflicts between 1767 and 1799. To sustain this endless expansion, the company needed more than British troops. It needed an army, and so it turned to India itself. Recruiting tens of thousands of local soldiers, known as sepoys, the company built a massive military force. By the year 1800, it commanded over 200,000 troops, an army larger than that of many European nations. A private corporation with the power of a state. With its vast private army and a decisive edge in military technology, the East India Company pressed forward. In 1803, it captured Delhi. The symbolic heart of power in India had fallen. Though resistance from forces like the Marathas continued in scattered conflicts for years, the outcome was no longer in doubt. By the early 19th century, the company stood as the dominant power across most of the subcontinent, controlling what is now India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Private corporation ruling millions, and the profits were staggering. Back in London, shareholders reaped the rewards of an empire built on trade and conquest. The company didn't just control vast territories, it held a monopoly over British trade in the region. Every cup of Indian tea consumed in Britain from the 1600s to the mid-1800s passed through the hands of the East India Company. But trade was only part of the equation. From the 1750s onward, the company began collecting taxes from the millions living under its rule, turning an entire population into a source of revenue. It was a system designed for profit, not for governance, and the consequences were devastating. The most catastrophic example came in 1770, the Bengal famine. As crops failed and millions faced starvation, the company's response was disastrously inadequate. Poor administration, relentless taxation, and indifference to local suffering turned a crisis into a catastrophe. An estimated 10 million people died. Even when a damning report was produced in 1772 by Warren Hastings, the first Governor-General of Bengal, detailing the failures, it changed little. Back in London, the company's leadership remained focused on one thing above all else: profit. And India was only part of a much larger system. The East India Company's reach extended further east, to Southeast Asia, and beyond that, to the vast markets of China and Japan. For a time, these nations resisted European intrusion, limiting trade to a handful of tightly controlled ports. But as the technological gap between Europe and Asia widened, that resistance grew harder to maintain. Eventually, it would break. By the 19th century, one trade above all others came to dominate the company's global operations: opium. Produced in India and exported primarily to China, it became the company's most profitable commodity, and one of its most destructive. As addiction spread across Chinese society, the Qing government attempted to stop it. Officials seized opium shipments, cracked down on traders, and even threatened death penalties for those involved in the trade. But the stakes were too high, and the British were not willing to walk away. The response was swift and uncompromising. In 1839, the East India Company, backed by the British government, went to war with the Qing dynasty of China. It would become known as the First Opium War. By 1842, the result was decisive. China was defeated. Hong Kong Island was ceded to the British, and the Qing Empire was forced to abandon its long-standing policy of isolation, opening its ports to European trade under unequal terms. It was a victory that secured immense profits, but it also revealed the true nature of the system the company had built. In just over 2 centuries, the East India Company had grown from a small group of merchants into a global superpower, controlling vast territories, commanding armies, and dominating some of the most valuable trade routes on Earth. Yet for all its strength, its fall would come suddenly and violently. In 1857, a rebellion erupted across India. It began as a mutiny among sepoy soldiers, but quickly spread into a widespread uprising against company rule. The causes ran deep. For decades, the East India Company had imposed heavy taxes, disrupted traditional systems, and absorbed independent states into its growing empire. Many Indian rulers, princes and nobles whose families had governed these lands for generations, now saw an opportunity to reclaim their power. Resentment had been building for years. Now it exploded. While some regions, like Bengal and the long-established centers of Madras and Bombay, remained relatively stable, others descended into chaos. In the north, around Delhi, company authority collapsed entirely. Sepoy troops, once the backbone of the company's military, turned against their employers, joining the rebellion in large numbers. The very army that had built the company's empire was now tearing it apart from within. And what followed would be one of the most brutal and conflicts in the history of British India. The rebellion would rage for over a year, and its cost was immense. More than 6,000 British civilians and company employees lost their lives. But the toll on India was far greater. An estimated 800,000 people perished, not only from the violence itself, but from the famine and disease that followed in its wake. It was a catastrophe, and it exposed the truth. The East India Company, once the most powerful corporation in the world, was no longer capable of governing the vast lands it controlled. The British government could no longer ignore it. In August 1858, Parliament passed the Government of India Act. With it, the rule of the East India Company came to an end. All of its territories were transferred to the British Crown. India would now be governed directly as part of the British Empire. A corporate empire replaced by an imperial one. And yet, the company did not vanish overnight. Years earlier, in 1833, an agreement had been made, one that guaranteed the company's shareholders a fixed annual dividend of 5% for 40 years. In exchange, the British government had taken greater control over its operations. That agreement could not simply be undone. And so, even stripped of its power, the East India Company lingered on. Its assets absorbed by the state, its authority gone, but its financial obligations still alive. For years, it continued to exist in the background, managing limited functions such as aspects of the tea trade, until finally in 1873, the end came. Parliament passed the East India Stock Dividend Redemption Act, formally dissolving the company and settling its remaining obligations to shareholders. After more than 2.5 centuries, it was over. But British rule in India did not end with the company. It would continue for nearly 70 more years until 1947, when India, along with what is now Pakistan, finally gained independence. The legacy of the East India Company, however, remains. It was a corporation that commanded armies, controlled nations, and reshaped the global economy. And in the end, its story serves as a warning. Because unlike modern corporations that are often considered too big to fail, the East India Company became something even more dangerous, too powerful to be allowed to survive.